There's a version of you in your head that already built the business, already wrote the book, already got the body, already changed everything. And then there's the version of you sitting on the couch right now. Phone in hand. 6 hours gone. The laundry still sitting in the basket. Somehow, both of those people are the exact same person, and you have absolutely no idea how to explain that to anyone. So you call it laziness, because that's the word everyone hands you. But here's the strange part. Almost nobody tells you about this. The people who feel this the hardest are rarely lazy at all. They're usually the most ambitious people in the entire room. And once you understand why, you will never call yourself lazy again. Because this was never about motivation. It was never about discipline either. To understand what's actually happening, we have to throw out the obvious answer first. The obvious answer says lazy people simply don't want things badly enough. If they wanted it, they'd just get up and do it. Simple as that. Except researchers who study this for a living found something completely backwards. The people who procrastinate the most often want the outcome the most intensely, which makes no sense at all. Until you look at what's really being protected. Not their time, not their schedule. Something far more fragile than that. Their sense of who they actually are. In 1978, 2 psychologists ran an experiment that explains this perfectly. Stephen Berglas and Edward Jones gave people a test, then offered them a choice. Take a pill that helps you focus, or one that actively makes you worse. Shockingly, many people deliberately chose the pill that would hurt their performance. At first, that looks completely insane. Why sabotage your own success on purpose? But it makes perfect sense once you see what it's actually defending. If you try your hardest and still fail, that failure means something devastating. It means you gave everything you had and it simply wasn't enough. But if you never really tried, the failure comes with a built-in excuse. Psychologists call this self-handicapping. Sabotage as a form of self-defense. The lower your effort, the safer your identity stays, no matter what happens. And here's the twist that flips this whole thing upside down. This mechanism gets stronger, not weaker, the bigger your ambitions actually are. Because bigger dreams carry bigger identities riding on whether they succeed. A small goal barely threatens who you believe yourself to be. A massive goal puts your entire sense of worth directly on the line. So the most ambitious people often protect themselves the hardest of all, which explains the paradox perfectly. The bigger the dream, the louder the freeze. But protecting your identity is only half of what's happening here. The other half lives somewhere much deeper than belief. It lives in your nervous system. Researcher Timothy Pychyl spent decades studying why people put things off. His conclusion surprised almost everyone who studies human behavior. Procrastination, he found, is not a time management problem at all. It is an emotion management problem wearing a very convincing disguise. You are not avoiding the task. You are avoiding the feeling the task creates. Anxiety, self-doubt, the fear of confirming your own worst suspicion about yourself. So your brain does something remarkably efficient. It just avoids the feeling entirely. It reaches for the phone, the snack, the sudden urge to clean the kitchen. Anything that delivers relief right now instead of risk somewhere later. Researcher Piers Steele built an entire equation to describe this exact trade. The further away a reward feels, the less your brain values it right now. Which means a distant dream competes against an immediate discomfort. And loses. Every single time, without exception, unless something else steps in. And that something else lives in one very specific part of your brain. Your prefrontal cortex. The part responsible for actually starting things. It's the part that has to override every warning your body sends you. And under enough perceived threat, that override system simply shuts down. This is where the word freeze stops being a metaphor completely. Your nervous system has exactly 3 classic responses to a perceived threat: fight, flight, or freeze. Most people only remember the first two, but freeze is the oldest and quietest of the three by far. It's the response built for threats you cannot fight and cannot outrun. And to your ancient nervous system, a massive dream registers as exactly that. Not exciting, not motivating. A threat too large to safely approach. So the body does the only thing it knows how to do with danger like that. It stops you completely, right at the exact moment you meant to begin. Which brings us to one very specific, very familiar scene. It's late. The laptop is open. The cursor is blinking on an empty page. Somewhere in this person's head is an entire finished vision of success. The launch, the applause, the version of themselves who actually did it. And yet their hands stay perfectly still on the keyboard. Not one word typed. From the outside, this looks exactly like laziness. Pure and simple. From the inside, it feels closer to standing at the edge of a cliff. Every second of delay is the nervous system quietly negotiating with fear. Not because the person doesn't care, because they care almost too much. Researcher Fuschia Sirois studied this exact group of people closely. She found that chronic procrastinators often hold themselves to brutally high standards. The higher the bar, the more terrifying it becomes to actually jump for it. So instead of jumping and possibly missing, many people simply stop moving. Stillness starts to feel safer than a jump that might not land. And so days turn into weeks. Weeks quietly turn into years. The dream doesn't disappear. It just gets quietly stored somewhere safe, untouched, unrisked, and therefore, technically, never actually failed, which feels like safety. But it is actually a very slow kind of loss, because a dream that never gets risked also never gets to exist for real. So what actually breaks this cycle? Not more motivation. Not more pressure. More pressure, researchers found, usually makes the freeze response even stronger, which is why yelling at yourself to just try harder rarely works at all. What actually helps is something almost nobody expects. Self-compassion. Sirois found that people who forgive their own past delays procrastinate less over time. Because shame adds another layer of threat on top of an already frightened system, and a more frightened nervous system freezes harder, not softer. Kindness, strangely enough, is what finally lowers the perceived size of the threat. A smaller threat needs less freezing, and a little movement finally becomes possible. Not a giant leap. Just one small low-stakes step forward, one sentence, one email, one 5-minute version of the enormous plan. Small enough that failing at it barely threatens anything at all. Which is exactly the point. The goal was never really about being lazy. So if you've spent years quietly calling yourself lazy, here is the truth. You were never short on ambition. You were drowning in exactly the opposite problem. Too much riding on the outcome. Too much of yourself tied up in the result. So your ancient nervous system did the only thing it knows how to do. It protected you. Even when what it was protecting you from was your own dream. So, the next time you find yourself frozen, staring at the thing you want most, don't call it laziness. Call it a fire big enough to be afraid of. Then take one small step anyway.